I'm Mara Nixon, 35 years old, a soldier, and a single mother to two incredible 10-year-old twins, Leo and Thea. After my divorce 2 years ago and receiving transfer orders to Fort Liberty, North Carolina, moving in with my parents seemed like the perfect solution. What at first seemed like a blessing wasn't. I contributed to the household, followed every rule, and tried to be the perfect daughter. But then my younger brother, Caleb, and his wife had a baby boy. And suddenly my children became invisible in their own grandparents' home. I never could have imagined that my service to this country could be so dismissed by my own father. If you are enjoying this story, please leave a comment on where you are watching from and hit the like and subscribe button to join our storytelling family for more dramatic, real-life stories. The announcement came on a chilly Sunday evening in early November, the kind where the scent of pine from the Christmas tree my mother had insisted on putting up early filled the whole house. We were sitting in the living room, the warmth of the fireplace pushing back against the North Carolina chill. "All right, everyone," my mother, Eleanor, clapped her hands together with a brightness that felt a little forced. "This coming weekend, we're doing the family photos for the Christmas cards." A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in my chest. For 2 years, since my divorce, I had felt like a guest in my childhood home, a satellite orbiting the warm, bright sun of my brother Caleb's family. But this felt different. A family photo was a statement of unity. It was a chance, I thought, for us to finally feel like a complete family again. A real chance for my children to feel like they belonged. That hope propelled me through the week. I spent an entire evening carefully pressing Thea's favorite velvet dress, its deep green color a perfect complement to the holidays. I made sure Leo's button-down shirt was crisp and white, laying it out with his best pair of khaki pants. I even went to the mall and bought a new burgundy sweater for myself, a soft, warm cashmere blend that I couldn't really afford, but it matched the color scheme my mother had dictated. Every action was precise, deliberate. I was preparing my small unit for a vital mission, Operation Belonging. I was a master sergeant in the U.S. Army, trained for logistical precision, and I approached this family event with the same focus as I would a formal inspection. I truly let myself believe that things could get better, that the deep, unspoken love of family would eventually win. Saturday morning arrived, bright and cold. I had my kids up early, fed, dressed, and ready to go a full hour ahead of schedule. Thea's hair was brushed into a shining cascade, and Leo, despite his groans, looked incredibly handsome. I looked at my children, their faces scrubbed and shining with anticipation, and my heart swelled. Just as we were about to head downstairs, my mother appeared in the doorway of my room. She had a flustered look on her face, her hands twisting the apron she was still wearing. "Mara, honey," she started, avoiding my eyes. "Caleb just called. Little Grayson has a slight fever, and Chloe is worried sick. They want to get the photo done right now so they can get him home to rest." She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Would you and the kids mind just staying here for now? It's so chaotic trying to take pictures with a sick baby." I felt a familiar, sinking feeling, but I pushed it down. "We can go with you," I offered, my voice steady. "The kids can wait quietly." "Oh no, it's better this way," she insisted, waving a dismissive hand. "The photographer said he can just Photoshop you three in later. The technology is amazing these days. It'll look completely natural." Her explanation sounded so reasonable, so full of concern for her sick grandchild. And I, who had been trained my entire adult life to trust my commanding officers, to trust the chain of command, defaulted to my training. I trusted my mother. So, I nodded. I agreed. I then spent the next 10 minutes consoling my disappointed children, smoothing down their hair and promising them, with a confidence I didn't feel, that the final picture would be beautiful and that we would all be in it together, smiling. 2 weeks later, a box from the printing company arrived. That evening, my mother laid the Christmas cards out on the dining room table like a winning hand of poker, her face beaming with pride. "Aren't they just perfect?" she cooed. I picked one up. My breath hitched in my throat. The glossy card felt as heavy as a brick in my suddenly numb fingers. The picture was perfect. My parents, Eleanor and Elias, were seated in the center on an elegant bench, smiling warmly. To their right stood my brother Caleb, his arm wrapped proudly around his wife Chloe, who was holding their son Grayson, dressed in a tiny suit, looking like a little prince. They were the image of the ideal American family. And on the other side of my parents, there was nothing, just the festive backdrop of the decorated fireplace. No me, no Leo and Thea. It wasn't that there was an awkward, empty space. No, it was worse. The photo had been framed and composed as if we were never meant to be there at all. They hadn't even tried to Photoshop us in. They had simply, cleanly, and efficiently erased us. We had been removed from the official record of our own family. My hand was trembling as I looked up at my mother, who was busy addressing an envelope. "Mom," I managed to say, my voice a dry whisper, "where are we?" She glanced up, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "Oh, honey, I forgot to tell you. The photographer tried, but he said adding you in just didn't look natural. It threw off the whole composition." She said it so casually, as if she were explaining why she'd chosen a different brand of coffee. "We'll just have to make sure we get a good one next year, okay?" Next year. She sealed the envelope with a decisive lick. My father, Elias, just cleared his throat, a dry, dismissive sound, before turning a page of his newspaper, the crinkle of paper echoing the shattering of my heart. No apology, no regret, not even a hint of acknowledgement. I looked over at my children. They had each picked up a card and were staring at it, their faces a mixture of confusion and a deep, quiet hurt that no 10-year-old should ever have to feel. In that moment, watching the light dim in their eyes, I finally understood. We weren't just invisible. We were an inconvenience. A problem that had been neatly and professionally deleted. I stared at that perfect, deliberate emptiness on the card. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message. And as I stood there, the memories flooded back, reminding me that this empty space wasn't new. I had been living in it my entire life. That gaping hole on the Christmas card dragged me back through time, pulling me into the ghost of a memory from when I was 16. A summer thunderstorm, the kind that turns the North Carolina sky a bruised purple, had torn through our town and ripped a section of shingles clean off our roof. Soon after, a steady rhythmic drip began in the living room, right over my mother's favorite armchair. Plink, plonk, plink. The sound was a constant, maddening reminder of a problem my parents, who were struggling financially at the time, couldn't afford to fix. I had spent that entire summer working at a local diner, bussing tables and washing dishes until my hands were perpetually raw and smelled faintly of bleach and coffee grounds. Over 3 months, I had saved up $800. I remember the crisp feel of those $20 bills, money that represented countless hours of sore feet and missed parties with friends. One evening, without a word, I walked into the kitchen, pulled the cash-stuffed envelope from my back pocket, and handed it to my father. "Here," I said quietly, "for the roof." My father, Elias, took the envelope, weighed it in his hand, and gave me a curt nod. "You're a practical girl, Mara," was all he said. Practical. Not thoughtful, not generous. Practical. It was a word you'd use for a good pair of boots, not your daughter. But I took the compliment, starved as I was for any kind of approval. I felt a surge of pride watching the roofers arrive a few days later, knowing my money had stopped the leak. 2 weeks later, it was Caleb's 18th birthday. My parents led him out to the driveway with his eyes covered. Parked there was a 1968 Ford Mustang, its dark green paint gleaming in the sun. It wasn't new, but it was iconic, a symbol of freedom and cool that every teenage boy dreamed of. My father clapped him on the back. "It's an investment," he declared to the small gathering of family. "An investment in his social future." The words hit me like a physical blow. My $800, my entire summer, was a patch, a practical fix for a hole. Their money, which I knew they didn't really have, was an investment. My money was used to maintain the bare minimum. Theirs was used to build my brother's image. It was in that moment that the first lines were drawn on what I would later come to understand as the map of our family's inequity. I was the fixer, He was the future. That map became clearer the day I announced my own future. I was 18, sitting at the same dining room table. "I've enlisted," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "I'm joining the army." Silence. My father stared at me, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, as if I'd just confessed to a crime. "The army?" he finally said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Why would you waste your potential like that? That's a place for kids with no other options, Mira." My mother's concern was different, but no less dismissive. "You'll never find a good husband in there," she fretted, already picturing a future of lonely holidays for me. There was no party, no congratulations, just a heavy sense of disappointment. My choice, a path of service, honor, and a desperate desire to belong to something that valued discipline and contribution, was seen as a failure, a dead end. Contrast that with the day Caleb, fresh out of college with a business degree, announced he was launching a tech startup. My parents threw a celebratory barbecue. They cashed in a portion of their retirement savings to give him seed money, their faces glowing with pride. "Caleb knows how to create value," my father would boom to anyone who would listen. His path was innovation and wealth. Mine was grunt work and government paychecks. After I moved back home with Leo and Thea, those family dinners became a masterclass in subtle degradation. It was a test of my military-grade endurance. My father would inevitably steer the conversation toward Caleb's latest triumph. "Caleb just closed a huge deal with a client in California," he'd announce, his eyes shining. "The boy is a natural. He really knows how to build something from nothing." Then he would turn to me, his gaze softening with something that looked like pity. "And how are things on the base, Mara? Still managing the supply depot?" "Well, that's good. It's steady work, at least." Steady work. The words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they were a dagger, coated in the thin sweetness of condescension. And he said it all right in front of Leo and Thea. He was teaching my children, his own grandchildren, a toxic lesson. Their mother's career, her service to the nation in uniform, was a second-class job compared to their uncle's pursuit of money. It was just steady, unremarkable. All these memories, these sharp, painful fragments, swirled in my mind as I stood in the living room, the rejected Christmas card still in my hand. They weren't isolated incidents. They were data points, meticulously plotted over decades, creating a clear and undeniable map of inequity. I was the functional daughter, the one you called when the roof leaked or when a steady hand was needed. I was the one who provided support, who shouldered burdens, and who was expected to do so without needing recognition. Caleb was the golden son, the vessel for all their hopes and dreams, the investment that was meant to pay dividends of pride and status. Everything I did was an obligation. Every minor success he had was proof of his genius. That Christmas card wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a moment of forgetfulness. It was a declaration. It was the final, brutal confirmation of a truth I had spent my entire life trying to unsee. In their eyes, my value wasn't in who I was, but in what I could do for them. And at that moment, apparently, I wasn't doing enough to even merit a place in the picture. That night, after I finally got the kids to sleep, their confused, hurt faces haunting me, I sat down at my laptop in the quiet darkness of my room. I opened my online banking app. With a steady hand, I transferred the monthly amount for household expenses to my father's account, just as I had every month for 2 years. But this time, it felt different. It was no longer a daughter's contribution. It felt like a payment, a fee for room and board, a transaction. And as I clicked Confirm, the transaction complete, I opened a new blank spreadsheet. The cursor blinked on the clean white page. I typed 2 words into the title bar. Operation Freedom. After a long, sleepless night replaying my family's casual cruelty in my mind, I woke up before dawn with a cold, hard clarity. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest. But something new had settled alongside it. Resolve. I couldn't change them. I couldn't make them see me or my children. But I could change my own circumstances. I could evacuate my kids from a war zone. While the rest of the house was still dark and silent, I slipped downstairs to the kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen pushing back the shadows. I opened a new Excel file. The cursor blinked, waiting. I typed the title, Operation Freedom. My training as a master sergeant in logistics took over. This was no longer a messy family drama. It was a mission. In the Army, you don't move troops without a plan. You account for every asset, every liability. I started listing my resources. Column A, my monthly salary. Column B, my basic allowance for housing, or BAH, the money the military gave me for off-base housing, which I'd been dutifully handing over to my father. Column C, all fixed expenses, car payment, insurance, groceries, the money I paid my parents. I color-coded everything, created formulas, and built projections. The objective was simple and audacious. Save enough for a down payment and closing costs to secure a VA loan for a modest house within 1 year. My silent war had begun. It wasn't a war of angry words. It was a war fought with numbers on a spreadsheet, a battle waged in silence. To accelerate the timeline, I needed more resources. My days were already full, from early morning PT to late afternoons at the supply depot on Fort Liberty. So, I started taking on side jobs. After my official duties ended, I didn't go home. A few nights a week, I tutored the kids of fellow soldiers in algebra, my brain switching from inventory lists to quadratic equations. On weekends, I picked up delivery shifts for a local pizza place, the kind with greasy checkered tablecloths and the best pepperoni in town. There were long, exhausting nights. I'd sit in my decade-old Honda between deliveries, the lingering smell of pepperoni and cardboard clinging to the upholstery, and a wave of profound loneliness would wash over me. I would lean my head against the steering wheel and think, what am I even doing? I was a 35-year-old master sergeant delivering pizzas on a Saturday night. It felt humiliating. But then I would pull out my phone and look at the picture of Leo and Thea from our last trip to the park, their faces bright with laughter. I imagined a small backyard of our own, a place where their laughter wouldn't be shushed, where their toys wouldn't be considered clutter. And just like that, the exhaustion would recede, replaced by a renewed purpose. Every dollar I earned, every $5 tip, was another round of ammunition in my fight. My parents only saw the surface. They saw me coming home later, my uniform looking more rumpled. "You're working too hard, Mara," my mother would say, her voice laced with disapproval. "You're never home. The children need you." My father would just grunt, calling me a workaholic. They had no idea I wasn't running myself into the ground for my job. I was building an escape route, $1 at a time. I also started building walls, small ones at first, but sturdy. I began to politely decline Sunday dinners when I knew Caleb and his family would be there. "Sorry, Mom, they've got me on the duty roster this weekend," I'd lie, my voice even and professional. The guilt was immense, but the relief was greater. I used that time to reclaim my children's joy. We went to the local library and checked out stacks of books. We had picnics at the park, even if it was just sandwiches and a thermos of lemonade. We discovered a little creek where we could skip stones. In these small pockets of peace, away from the constant judgment of my parents' house, my children started to feel like themselves again. We could be loud and silly. We could just be. My mother complained that I was pulling away, that I was being distant. She didn't understand that I wasn't distancing myself from the family. I was protecting what was left of my own. Every no was a sandbag stacked against a rising flood. For months, it felt like a grueling, lonely march. But then, a flicker of light appeared. One afternoon on base, I saw a flyer on a community bulletin board for a financial wellness workshop for service members. On a whim, I signed up. The main speaker was a retired female command sergeant major, a woman with a powerful, no-nonsense presence. She spoke about her own journey, about how she used her VA loan benefit to buy a small farm after she retired. She spoke of independence, of building a life on her own terms, using the benefits she had earned. Her words weren't just inspiring, they were a direct order to take action. The very next day, I made an appointment with a VA loan specialist. I walked in with my Operation Freedom spreadsheet printed out, my file of pay stubs and bank statements organized like a mission briefing. I was nervous, expecting to be told I was years away from my goal. The specialist, a kind man named Mr. Davies, looked over my numbers. He tapped his pen on my meticulously organized budget, nodding slowly. He looked up at me over his glasses, a small smile on his lips. "Sergeant Nixon," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "You're doing great. Based on this, you absolutely qualify for pre-approval." A warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing: validation. For the first time in months, I saw a tangible light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't just a loan. It wasn't just a number on a page. It was a key. It was an exit. If you've ever had to quietly fight a battle no one else could see, if you know what it feels like to work twice as hard for your own peace of mind, please support Mara's silent fight by hitting the like button. And in the comments, just type the words Operation Freedom to let every other silent warrior out there know they are not alone. The pre-approval letter from the mortgage company felt like a secret medal pinned to the inside of my uniform. It was a tangible piece of hope I carried with me, but my lonely battle continued, fought in the silent hours of late-night budgeting and early morning exhaustion. I was making progress, but I was profoundly tired. Then, one Thursday afternoon, a lifeline appeared in the most unexpected way. I was in the supply depot with my first sergeant, Frank Miller. He was a quiet, respected man, the kind of NCO who saw everything but said little. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, and I mostly tried to stay off his radar. He must have noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way my shoulders slumped even when I tried to stand at attention. We were finishing up a tedious inventory count when he spoke, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence. "Sergeant Nixon," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "My wife, Sarah, is making a big pot of gumbo Saturday night. You and your kids should come over for dinner. Our boys are always asking about Leo and Thea." I froze, a box of supplies halfway to the shelf. The invitation was so simple, so direct, it caught me completely off guard. In my parents' house, every interaction felt transactional. Every invitation had a hidden cost. But this was just an offer of food and company. It had been so long since anyone had invited me and my children over just because they liked us. Frank's invitation felt less like a social courtesy and more like a canteen of cool water offered to a soldier on a long, hot march. I was so stunned, I could only manage a quiet, "Yes, sir, thank you. We'd love that." Pulling up to the Miller's house that Saturday, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety. Their home, a modest single-story ranch house in a quiet neighborhood not far from the base, looked nothing like my parents' imposing two-story colonial. But as soon as I stepped out of the car, I could hear the sound of children laughing from the backyard. The front door swung open before I could even ring the bell. A woman with a warm, open face and a splash of flour on her cheek beamed at us. This had to be Sarah. "You must be Mara," she said, and before I could respond, she pulled me into a genuine, warm hug that lasted a few seconds too long. The kind I couldn't remember getting from my own mother. "We are so glad you're here. Frank, the Nixons are here." Their house wasn't large or fancy, but it was filled with the easy chaos of a happy home. A dog barked a welcome, kids' drawings were taped to the refrigerator, and the rich, spicy aroma of gumbo filled every corner. Leo and Thea, usually shy in new situations, were immediately swept up by the Miller boys and disappeared into the backyard. Sarah led me to the kitchen. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, feeling awkward and out of place. "You can keep me company," she said, handing me a glass of sweet iced tea. As I stood there, leaning against the counter, she moved around her kitchen with an easy grace. She was an elementary school teacher, and she had a gentle, calming presence. After a few minutes of small talk, she paused her stirring and looked at me, her expression kind. "So, how are things at home, really? Frank says you've seemed pretty stressed lately." It was the simple, direct question, the genuine concern in her eyes, that did it. The walls I had so carefully built, the discipline I used to keep my emotions in check, just crumbled. To my horror, I felt tears welling up. I tried to speak, but a sob caught in my throat. And so, standing in a near stranger's warm, fragrant kitchen, I told her everything. The Christmas card. The years of being the practical daughter. the constant comparisons, the soul-crushing dinners. I let it all pour out in a quiet, hiccuping torrent. Sarah didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes full of empathy. When I finally finished, wiping my tears with the back of my hand, she simply placed a comforting hand on my arm. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "No one should have to go through that alone." Later that evening, after a loud, joyful dinner filled with more laughter than I'd experienced in 2 years, the kids were settled in the living room, watching a movie. Frank and I sat on the back porch, the cool night air, a relief. He handed me a glass of iced tea and was silent for a long moment, just looking out at the dark yard. "Sergeant Nixon," he finally said, his tone shifting from friendly host to the first sergeant I knew. "I'm going to talk to you soldier to soldier. You are in a hostile environment. Your family is conducting psychological operations that are degrading your morale and that of your children. They are isolating you from support systems. This is not a typical family problem. This is a campaign, and you need an extraction plan." His words were blunt, almost brutally so. But hearing my situation framed in military terms, the language of strategy and survival that I understood so well, was like a bucket of cold, clarifying water. He wasn't telling me I was being overly emotional or too sensitive. He was telling me I was under attack, and that my response, to plan, to prepare, to find a way out, was not an overreaction, but a correct and necessary tactical decision. He validated everything I had been feeling. When it was time to leave, Sarah met us at the door with a heavy container of leftover gumbo. "For the kids' lunch tomorrow," she said, pressing it into my hands. Then she squeezed my arm. "And Mara? Don't you ever for 1 second think you're alone in this. We're your family now. The military family looks out for its own." Driving home that night, with my children sleeping peacefully in the back seat, the scent of Sarah's gumbo faintly perfuming the car, I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. I had allies. I had a safe harbor. My Operation Freedom was no longer a solo mission. I now had a fire team watching my back, and that changed everything. The warmth from my evening with the Millers carried me for a few days, a fragile shield against the chill in my own home. But that shield was about to be shattered. The following Sunday dinner felt like a strategic ambush. The air was thick with unspoken tension from my recent absences. Then, between the mashed potatoes and the green bean casserole, Caleb and Chloe dropped their bomb. "So, big news," Caleb announced, a smug grin spreading across his face. "We're finally starting the big renovation on our house. It's going to be amazing," Chloe chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "It's a huge project, though. The contractor said we'll need to be out of the house for a few months, so we'll just be crashing here for a bit." Crashing here. The words were delivered as a statement of fact, not a request. They didn't look at me. They didn't ask for my opinion, even though my monthly contribution kept the lights on and the pantry stocked. My presence, and that of my children, was simply an irrelevant detail in their grand plan. My father slapped the table with delight, making the silverware jump. "That's wonderful. The whole family under one roof again. It'll be just like old times." Then he turned to me, his tone shifting from celebratory to commanding. "Mara, you'll need to clear out some of the kids' things from their room. Make some space for Grayson's crib and all his gear." He issued the order like a general, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was a soldier too. And I knew what an invasion looked like. Within a week, my temporary sanctuary became an occupied territory. The invasion was swift and total. Expensive, brightly colored plastic toys belonging to Grayson colonized the living room, a loud and chaotic mess that my kids were told not to touch. Chloe's collection of positive parenting books, with titles like The Awakened Parent and Raising a Secure Child, were left strewn across every available surface, monuments to her self-proclaimed expertise. She immediately established a new set of house rules, all centered around her son. No loud noises during Grayson's nap times, which seemed to be all day. No television in the common areas because the blue light disrupts infant brainwave patterns. No sugary snacks in the house which meant my kids couldn't even have a cookie after school. Yet, for all her sanctimonious rules, Chloe and Caleb were the messiest, most inconsiderate people I had ever met. Dirty diapers were left on the coffee table. Half-eaten bowls of organic baby food were left to crust over on the kitchen counter. The house, once my tense but orderly refuge, now felt like a suffocating prison. And my children and I were its lowest-ranking inmates. The first major casualty of the occupation was Thea's music. My daughter loved her violin. Practicing in the afternoons was her way of unwinding after a long day at school. The melodies of Vivaldi and Bach filling our small corner of the house with something beautiful. One afternoon, she was in the middle of a piece when Chloe emerged from her room, a deep frown etched on her face. "Mara, can you please ask her to stop?" she said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "That noise is startling Grayson." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Noise. She had called my daughter's music noise. "Chloe, this is her daily practice time. She has a recital coming up." Chloe just shrugged, a gesture of supreme indifference. "Well, you should find a quieter hobby for her. This house needs to be a peaceful environment for a developing child." She was talking about Grayson, of course, completely oblivious to the fact that my child was also developing, that she was crushing my daughter's spirit right in front of me. That evening, I watched from the doorway as Thea gently wiped down her violin, placed it in its velvet-lined case, and slid it under her bed. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I knew that something bright and precious inside her had just been broken. The attacks kept coming, small but relentless. Leo had been working for weeks on a model rocket for his school's science fair. It was his passion project, an intricate model he was immensely proud of. One morning, it was gone from the corner of the living room where he'd been carefully assembling it. When I asked my father, he waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that thing?" It was a cluttered mess, and frankly, a safety hazard. I put it in the storage shed. He didn't ask. He just removed it, treating my son's hard work like a piece of trash. At dinner that night, my father delivered another familiar blow. In front of everyone, he once again praised Caleb's latest business venture before turning to me with that pitiful look. "It's so wonderful to see him building a legacy," he said. "Of course, your career is admirable too, Mara. Very stable, just not groundbreaking." The words, the constant casual dismissals of my life's work, stung as usual. But this time, it was different. This time, I could see the impact they were having on my children. I saw Leo flinch. I saw Thea shrink into herself. Later, as I was tucking Thea into bed, she was unusually quiet. I found her staring at the empty space under her bed where her violin case used to be. Tears were silently streaming down her face. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why doesn't Chloe like my music?" As I held my daughter, her silent sobs shaking her small body, Frank Miller's words echoed in my head, sharp and clear. "You are in a hostile environment. This is a campaign." And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my children had just become the first casualties. That was a line I would not let them cross. The quiet, strategic war of saving money was no longer enough. The occupation had to end. It was time for a counteroffensive. The breaking point didn't come with a shout. It came in the dead of a long, anxious silence. I had a mandatory 36-hour field training exercise on base, a routine part of military life, but this time felt different. It was the first time I'd be away from the children overnight since Caleb and Chloe's occupation began. Before I left, I prepared everything meticulously. I laid out clothes for the kids, packed their school lunches for the next 2 days, and sat down with my mother. "Mom, this is Leo's rescue inhaler," I said, placing the blue plastic device firmly in her hand. "He gets wheezy when the air is damp. Please make sure he has it with him." She nodded vaguely, more interested in the TV show playing in the background. Throughout the entire exercise, a cold dread coiled in my gut. My soldier's intuition, the same instinct that tells you when something is wrong on patrol, was screaming at me. On the second afternoon, during a short break, I tried calling the house. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I sent a text to Thea. Everything okay? Love you. Minutes later, a reply came back. It wasn't words. It was just a single emoji. A sad face with a tear. That was it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I found my commanding officer. Sir, I have a family emergency. I need to return home immediately. I didn't know the details, but I knew my children were in trouble. I didn't realize how right I was. I broke every speed limit driving home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I burst through the front door, my chest heaving. The scene in the living room was infuriatingly normal. Caleb and Chloe were sprawled on the couch, watching a reality TV show on a screen so large it dominated the room. They glanced up, annoyed at my sudden entrance. "Where are Leo and Thea?" I demanded, my voice tight. Chloe gestured lazily with her thumb towards the basement door. "They're downstairs," she said, her eyes already back on the TV. "We needed to set up a bigger play area for Grayson up here, so Dad helped us move their stuff down." My blood turned to ice. I didn't walk, I ran. I threw open the basement door and plunged down the rickety wooden steps. The damp, musty smell hit me like a physical wall. And then I saw them. In the dim, dusty light from a single bare bulb, my children's lives had been relegated to a corner. Their beds were pushed against a crumbling concrete wall, their clothes haphazardly piled in open boxes. Leo was huddled on his mattress, wrapped in a thin blanket, his small shoulders shaking. I could hear it from across the room, the strained, high-pitched sound of his wheezing breath. Thea was beside him, her arm wrapped protectively around him, her face pale with fear. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. My rage became something cold, sharp, and clear. It was a weapon. I walked over, scooped up my son, his body trembling, and took my daughter's hand. "Come on," I said, my voice dangerously calm. We walked back up the stairs, leaving their discarded belongings in the dark. I walked into the living room and stood directly in front of the television, blocking their view. My father, Caleb, and Chloe all looked up, startled by the sight of me holding my wheezing son. "Who?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "Gave you permission to do this?" My father, Elias, was the first to recover, his face hardening into a familiar scowl. "Don't overreact, Mara. It's temporary. They're kids. They can sleep anywhere." Caleb chimed in, his voice dripping with the smug entitlement I'd come to despise. "We needed the space, Mara. Grayson is sensitive to the dust upstairs." His words were like a slap in the face. His son was sensitive to dust, so mine, who had diagnosed asthma, was thrown into a mold-infested basement. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This was cruelty. This was a deliberate act of putting my children's health, their very safety, at risk for their own convenience. But it was my father who delivered the final, fatal blow. Trying to shut down my rebellion, he stood up, puffing out his chest. "Listen to me," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Caleb's family is building a future. They have needs that must take priority. Your career is a job. His work is about building an empire." An empire? And my children? What were they? Sacrificial lambs on the altar of Caleb's so-called empire. A line from the Bible, one my grandmother used to read to me, flashed in my mind. "If anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." And in that moment, everything broke. All the years of being the practical girl, the fixer, the good soldier, it all burned away. I looked my father dead in the eye. "Your priorities are wrong, Dad." The words hung in the air, stunning them into silence. I turned away from him and looked at my children. My voice was no longer that of a daughter. It was the voice of a master sergeant giving a direct order. "Leo, Thea, pack your essential gear. You have 10 minutes. We are leaving this post." Their eyes widened, but they didn't question me. They scrambled to do as I said. My family stared, mouths agape, as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. I pulled out my cell phone, my hand perfectly steady. I found the contact I needed and pressed call. It rang once. "Miller," Frank's voice answered, calm and professional. Frank, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the stunned silence of the room. It's Mara Nixon. I need to execute the extraction plan. Right now. The moment a parent's love for their child turns into a warrior's instinct to protect is one of the most powerful forces on Earth. If you believe Mara did the absolute right thing, hit the like button to stand with her. And in the comments below, show your support by simply typing the words, "Leave now." 20 minutes. That's how long it took. 20 minutes after my call to Frank Miller, the headlights of his Ford F-150 pickup truck cut through the darkness in front of my parents' house. As Leo and Thea scrambled out the front door, each clutching a duffel bag filled with their most essential belongings, my family just stood there in the entryway, frozen in disbelief. Frank hopped out of the driver's seat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply took the bags from my hands, loaded them into the truck bed, and held the passenger door open for me. He was a soldier on an extraction mission. As we pulled away, leaving my family standing on the porch like statues, a profound sense of relief washed over me. When we arrived at the Miller house, the lights were on, and Sarah was waiting at the door. She didn't bombard us with questions either. She just knelt, opened her arms, and said, "Welcome home, you guys." It was in the safety of her embrace that Leo and Thea finally broke. The fear and confusion they had held back for so long came pouring out in a flood of tears. Sarah just held them, murmuring comforting words, while Frank quietly brought in our bags. She led them to the guest room, where she had already made up the beds and left out glasses of warm milk and cookies on the nightstand. Watching my children being enveloped in such unconditional kindness, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. This was our safe house. This was where we would regroup before launching our counterattack. The next morning, the Miller's kitchen table became our operations center. It looked like something out of a movie, a tactical meeting in the heart of suburbia. Post-it notes were stuck to the cabinets, a laptop was open to my Operation Freedom spreadsheet, and 3 coffee mugs steamed in the center of the table. "All right," I began, tapping a pen on my notepad. Phase 1, extraction. That's complete. I drew a firm line through the first item on my list. Now we're in Phase 2, secure position. This was my fire team, my chosen family. And they moved with incredible efficiency. Sarah, with her teacher's practicality, was on the phone with the kids' school, calmly explaining there was a family situation and ensuring their attendance records would be handled. Frank was on his laptop, emailing a contact in the JAG Corps, the military's legal arm. "Just a precaution," he said. "It's always good to have legal counsel on standby." My role was command and control. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. No more lonely, secret planning. It was time for action. I emailed the VA loan specialist, Mr. Davies, letting him know my timeline had been accelerated. Then, I pulled up the information for a real estate agent I'd researched weeks ago, a woman who specialized in helping military families relocate. For a moment, my finger hovered over the call button. Admitting I needed help, exposing my family's ugly secrets to a stranger. It made me feel vulnerable, weak. I felt a lifetime of conditioning telling me to handle my problems quietly, to not be a burden. But then I remembered a Brené Brown talk I'd watched online late one night. "Vulnerability is not weakness," she had said. "It's our greatest measure of courage." I took a deep breath. Daring to ask for help, daring to stand up for my children. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. That was courage. I pressed the call button. "Good morning, this is Linda," a professional voice answered. My voice came out clear and steady, devoid of the panic I felt inside. "Hi, Linda. My name is Master Sergeant Mara Nixon. I'm looking to rent a 3-bedroom house, something with a backyard, close to the elementary school. I need to move in as soon as possible. My budget is X, and I have a VA loan pre-approval for a future purchase." I wasn't a desperate woman fleeing her family. I was a qualified client with a clear set of requirements. I was in control. Linda was incredible. She understood the urgency of military life. "Understood, Sergeant. Let me see what I can do." While my family was likely sitting at home, assuming I was falling apart, expecting me to come crawling back within a week, I was executing a plan. I pulled up a checklist app on my phone, one I used for organizing complex logistical moves on base. I created a new list titled Operation New Home Base. Phase 1, Extraction, complete. Phase 2, Secure Position, in progress. Phase 3, Asset Recovery, pending. Phase 4, Establish New Forward Operating Base, pending. Seeing it all laid out, broken down into manageable steps, calmed the storm inside me. This wasn't just an emotional crisis, it was a logistical problem, and I was an expert at solving those. That afternoon, an email from Linda popped into my inbox. It contained links to 3 available rental properties. All of them were within my budget and in the right school district. But one of them made my heart skip a beat. It was a small blue house on a quiet, tree-lined street. The pictures showed a clean, bright interior, but it was the photo of the backyard that sealed it. There was a huge, sprawling oak tree, its thick branches looking like they were made for a tire swing. I could see it so clearly. I could picture Leo and Thea laughing, their faces tilted up towards the sun, swinging higher and higher. I could picture a small vegetable garden in the corner. I could picture peace. This wasn't just a house, it was a victory. It was the physical manifestation of my freedom. While my family was probably debating my next move, I was already 2 steps ahead, planning a future they couldn't even imagine for me. I picked up the phone and called Linda back. My voice was firm, decisive. The voice of a commander who has identified her target. "The house on Elm Street," I said. "The blue one with the oak tree. I'll take it." 2 days later, I executed Phase 3, Asset Recovery. I didn't go back to that house alone. Beside me in the passenger seat of my car was First Sergeant Frank Miller. He was in his full Army service uniform, the deep blue jacket perfectly pressed, the ribbons and medals on his chest a testament to a career of honor. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a shield. He was a silent symbol of the order, discipline, and integrity my family had so casually dismissed. Behind us, a moving truck from a local company I'd hired rumbled, ready and waiting. We pulled up to the curb. The moving truck parked behind us with a soft hiss of its air brakes. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't ring the bell. I slid my own key into the lock, turned it, and walked in. My family was in the living room, exactly as I'd pictured them, immersed in the afternoon glow of the television. My mother, my father, Caleb, and Chloe. They all looked up as we entered, and they froze. The sight of me, followed by First Sergeant Miller in full uniform, and then 2 large professional movers in company jumpsuits, completely shattered their reality. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air crackled. I was no longer the penitent daughter returning to beg for forgiveness. I was a commanding officer, arriving to oversee a planned operation. My father was the first to find his voice, attempting to reclaim his authority. "Mara, what is the meaning of this? What is this circus?" He gestured vaguely at the movers. "You think you can just walk out and make it on your own with 2 children? You'll be back here in a week, with your tail between your legs." I met his gaze, my own perfectly calm. There was no anger, no tears, just a quiet, unshakable resolve. "No, Dad," I said, my voice even. "I won't be back." I walked to the coffee table and placed a thin manila folder on its surface. I didn't slam it down. I placed it with a soft, deliberate motion that was somehow louder than a shout. I slid the first document out. "This," I said, pushing it towards him, "is the fully executed lease agreement for the house on Elm Street, which I signed this morning. My children and I move in tomorrow." I slid the second document out. "This is a copy of my most recent bank statement. As you can see, I have enough in my savings to cover all our expenses for the next 6 months without factoring in any of my additional income." The color began to drain from my father's face. My mother just stared, her mouth slightly open. Then I slid out the final piece of paper. "And this," I said, my voice dropping to an almost clinical tone, "is the pre-approval letter for a VA home loan in the amount of $250,000. So, to answer your question, yes, I think I can make it." A harsh, incredulous laugh erupted from Caleb. He shook his head, a smirk returning to his face. "Where did you get that kind of money?" What can you possibly do with a sergeant's salary? That was the opening I had been waiting for. I turned my full attention to him. This was the final move, the checkmate. You remember my basic allowance for housing, Caleb? The BAH? That substantial tax-free payment the Army provides me with every single month to ensure my children have a roof over their heads? I paused, letting the question hang in the air. The money I've been dutifully transferring into Dad's bank account for the past 2 years to help the family. It didn't just disappear, I saved it. Every single cent that wasn't used for this house, I put away. While you were busy building your empire with Mom and Dad's retirement fund, I was building my war chest. My mother finally spoke, her voice a sputtering whisper. But that money was for you to help us. To contribute. I cut her off, my voice now as cold and hard as steel. No, I said, looking from her to my father. That money was to house my children. I used it to help this family out of a sense of duty. Now it will be used for its intended purpose. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room. The smug smirk slid off Caleb's face, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. Chloe looked from me to him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. My father stared at the papers on the table as if they were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. Their entire power structure, the family hierarchy they had built and maintained for decades, was based on a single, flawed assumption. That I was weak, that I was dependent, that I needed them more than they needed me. The moment I presented them with cold, hard, undeniable proof to the contrary, the whole rotten structure collapsed in on itself. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to cry. I just needed to present the facts. The truth was my weapon, and it had hit its mark with devastating precision. I turned to the two movers who had been standing patiently and silently by the door. Gentlemen, I said, my voice returning to a normal, professional tone. My children's belongings are in their original room, upstairs, second door on the left. And there are some things in the basement. Please begin. They nodded and headed for the stairs. I stood there for a moment longer, watching my family. They were utterly broken, speechless. And for the first time in my entire life, standing in that room, I looked at them. And they seemed so incredibly small. The battle was over. The first night in our new rental house was defined by an almost deafening silence. After I tucked Leo and Thea into their beds, their exhausted faces finally peaceful in sleep, I came downstairs and sat on the floor in the middle of the empty living room. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long rectangular shadows across the bare hardwood floors. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. There was no blaring television from the other room, no sound of my mother's judgmental sighs, no feeling of needing to walk on eggshells in my own space. The quiet I had craved for so long was finally here. But it was a strange, hollow peace. The adrenaline from the confrontation, the triumphant feeling of victory I'd felt as the moving truck pulled away, had evaporated, leaving behind a profound emptiness. I had won the war, yes, but in doing so, I'd also lost the last ghost of a hope for the family I always wished I had. I realized the battle hadn't just been against them. It had been against my own stubborn, naive hope that one day they might finally see me. And now, that hope was gone for good. A few days later, as we began to unpack, I noticed a lingering sadness in the kids. They were safe, but they were still processing the trauma. They needed a way to let go of the hurt. I remembered a technique a counselor on base had once mentioned, a small ritual for releasing negative emotions. That evening, I gathered them in our new, still overgrown backyard as dusk settled. I gave each of them a piece of paper and a pen and sat with them on the back steps. I want you to write down everything that made you sad at Grandma and Grandpa's house, I said softly. Any mean words, any time you felt invisible or unfair. Get it all out. I watched them, their small brows furrowed in concentration. Thea wrote furiously, her pencil scratching against the paper. Leo wrote just a few words, then drew a picture of a broken model rocket. I took my own piece of paper and wrote my own list. Invisible, unworthy, not good enough, a disappointment. practical. When we were done, I brought out a small metal mixing bowl. One by one, we read our words aloud, if we wanted to, and then we lit a corner of the paper and dropped it into the bowl. We watched the paper curl and blacken, the angry words turning to ash and smoke, drifting away into the darkening North Carolina sky. As the last piece of paper burned, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a magic cure, but it was a beginning. It was an act of taking our power back. About a week after we moved in, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but I steeled myself and accepted the call. Her voice was thick with tears, but they were not tears of remorse. "Mara, it's chaos here," she sobbed. "Caleb and Chloe are fighting constantly. The house is a mess. We need you. Can't you just come home?" The request was so breathtakingly selfish, it almost made me laugh. She didn't miss me. She missed my function. She missed the buffer, the fixer, the quiet manager of her chaotic household. A quote I had underlined in my old copy of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning came to my mind. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This was my space. My mother's manipulative plea was the stimulus, and I had the power to choose my response. "No, Mom," I said, my voice calm but unbreachable. "I can't. That isn't my home anymore." I took a breath. "If you want to see Leo and Thea, you are welcome to call and arrange a visit here. But this is my house, and in my house, we have rules about respect." I had just drawn the first real boundary of my life. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once. After I hung up, my hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. That night, I sat on the back porch long after the kids were asleep, thinking about forgiveness. Was it my duty to forgive them? The word felt heavy, complicated. Forgiving them felt like saying what they did was okay, and it wasn't. But as I sat there, listening to the chirping of the crickets, I came to a different understanding. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I was giving to them. It was a gift I was giving to myself. It wasn't about absolving them. It was about releasing me. Forgiving them didn't mean I had to forget the lessons they had taught me about my own worth. It didn't mean I had to erase the boundaries I had just fought so hard to build. It simply meant I was choosing to no longer let their bitterness and their limitations poison my future. I could forgive them for being the flawed, short-sighted people they were, without ever having to let them close enough to hurt me or my children again. As I made that choice, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deeper and more real than the hollow quiet of that first night. The war was truly over now, not just on the outside, but on the inside too. Just as I was about to head inside, my phone buzzed again. My heart leaped, expecting another call from my mother, but the name on the screen was Dad. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was gruff, awkward. "Mara," he said. I heard you signed the lease on that house on Elm." There was a long pause. "I know a bit about plumbing. If you need anything checked out before you buy, I could take a look." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. But it wasn't nothing. It was a crack in the wall, a small tentative step from his world into mine. And it was a beginning. 6 months after we left my parents' house, I stood on the sidewalk in front of a small, charming blue house with a white picket fence and a magnificent old oak tree spreading its protective branches over the front lawn. In my hand, I held a single, shiny key. I had done it. Operation Freedom was complete. After months of renting, my VA loan had come through, a benefit I had earned over 15 years of dedicated service in the United States Army. The satisfying click of the key turning in the lock felt like the final word in a long, painful argument. As the door swung open, Leo and Thea, who had been vibrating with excitement behind me, let out a synchronized whoop of joy. They raced past me, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms, their laughter bouncing off the walls. That sound, that pure, uninhibited joy, that was the sound of freedom. This house was so much more than wood, drywall, and shingles. It was a fortress of my own making. It was a monument to my independence, built with the fruits of the very career my family had dismissed as a second-rate job. Every grueling PT session in the pre-dawn cold, every exhausting late-night shift at the depot, every dollar I had painstakingly saved, it was all crystallized in this moment, in this beautiful, quiet space that was ours and ours alone. My father's tentative offer of help had, surprisingly, turned into a quiet bridge. He came over one Saturday, true to his word, and spent the afternoon inspecting the plumbing and showing me how to check the circuit breakers. And about a month after we moved in, he called again. "Mara," he said, his voice hesitant. "Your mother and we were wondering if we could come see the house." I hesitated, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. But then I looked around at my home, at the life I had built. I was the one in control now. "You can," I said. "We'd like that." When they came, they were different. Subdued. They walked through the house, admiring the fresh paint and the simple furniture I'd started to collect. My father pointed out the quality of the hardwood floors. My mother commented on how much sunlight the kitchen received. There were no backhanded compliments, no subtle criticisms. Finally, my father sat down at my small kitchen table, picking up the framed photo of me in my dress uniform that I kept on the counter. He looked at it for a long moment, then at me. "Everything is in perfect order here, Mara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "You did a good job, a really good job." He cleared his throat. We're proud of you." Those 3 words I had yearned to hear my entire life. Hearing them now, after everything, didn't erase the past. But it felt like a gentle rain falling on a land that had been in drought for a very long time. It was a beginning. Our new life settled into a peaceful, happy rhythm. Leo, who had always been so anxious and quiet at my parents' house, blossomed. He joined the robotics club at school, his brilliant mind finally having a place to shine. His nervous energy was replaced with a quiet confidence that made my heart ache with pride. And Thea. Thea started playing her violin again. The case came out from under her bed, and soon, the bright, joyful melodies of Vivaldi once again filled our home in the afternoons. The music was no longer just practice, it was a celebration. One day, I was helping her hang one of her own watercolor paintings in the living room. She stepped back to admire her work, then turned to me, her eyes shining. "Mommy," she said, "I love our house." She paused, then added, "Here. I feel like I can breathe." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow, and tears stung my eyes. I knelt and hugged her tight, realizing in that moment the true legacy I was building for my children. It wasn't about the house, or the money, or proving anyone wrong. It was about this feeling, the right to take up space in the world, the freedom to simply breathe. The greatest inheritance I could ever give them was this lesson. You must never let anyone else define your worth, and you must always be brave enough to build your own space where you can breathe. Now, I have a new morning ritual. I wake up before the sun, make a fresh cup of coffee, and sit on my small back porch. I watch the sky slowly lighten over the little garden I've started planting. I am no longer living in anyone's shadow. I have learned how to create my own sunshine. My relationship with my parents has been reestablished, but on my terms, with clear and healthy boundaries. They visit sometimes, and our conversations, though occasionally still awkward, are no longer toxic. I have forgiven them, not because they asked for it or even because they deserved it, but because I deserve peace. And in the quiet moments of my new life, I've started volunteering as a mentor for younger soldiers, sharing my story and my hard-won knowledge about financial planning and setting boundaries. I've learned that turning your wounds into wisdom is the final step in healing. I am Master Sergeant Mara Nixon, a soldier, a mother, a homeowner. And this story, the one I am sharing with you now, is not about the betrayal I endured, but about the victory I built for myself. My story is finished, but I know it's just one of many. Every one of us has fought a silent battle and deserves to build our own victory. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you a piece of strength for your own journey, I would be honored if you shared that strength. In the comments below, simply write, I am my own sunshine. Let's fill this space with light and remind each other that we are not alone. And to hear more stories of resilience and strength, please subscribe and become part of our storytelling family.